Hey everyone and welcome back to a new video. While 2024 is set to be a big year for Age of Sigmar with the new 4th edition coming out this summer, it also continues to be a pretty big one for fans of Warhammer the Old World. Following the game's successful launch back in January, along with new models and a swathe of classic ones for the Bretonnian and Tomb Kings factions, the focus has now shifted to the other official armies, starting with the Orc and Goblin tribes and Dwarves closely on their heels. Yet while the game proves to be incredibly popular, far more than Games Workshop ever expected, it's fair to say that there's a bit of a sour note in the community regarding legacy factions. These are the armies that aren't officially supported, which include Lizardmen, Vampire Counts, Skaven and a few others, and they won't get ongoing rules updates or new models for the foreseeable future. At least that's how things stood at the game's launch. That might now be changing because in a recent designer interview, the team behind Warhammer the Old World admitted that even they were beginning to revisit their initial plan for the game, opening up new possibilities for them to explore and possibly some hope for those fans whose armies are relegated to that legacy league. So in this video, I'm going to go through what we actually heard from the team and suggest where this could take the Old World over the coming years. If you're keen to join me and have any ideas of your own, then let's jump right in. So I do think that in the context of the scope of the game, it's important to reflect on what the Old World meant to Games Workshop when they first announced it. In short, it's a game they never actually wanted to make. The rank and file format and the depth of some of the rules in Warhammer Fantasy were seen by staff as too difficult for new players to get into, and the need to assemble potentially large numbers of models to have a decent sized army also made it a somewhat chunky investment and a tough one to sell in stores. You might disagree, but that was the experience staff were reporting back to Warhammer HQ, and it's that impression that ultimately led to Fantasy being shelved in favour of Age of Sigmar, whose format aligned a bit more closely with Warhammer 40k. And since then, Games Workshop has doubled down on accessibility, making it so that new players, whether they're looking at 40k or AOS, only need a few models, easy to apply paints, and they're pretty much set. Nevertheless, the community continued to call for Fantasy to come back, and in the end, Games Workshop decided that if you can't convince them, you might as well make some money anyways, and so they introduced Warhammer the Old World, one of their most ambitious projects to date. However, it's important to say that while the Old World has received and continues to receive a ton of focus from Games Workshop, they don't actually see it as an official game. Warhammer stores won't teach people how to play it, and practically all of the models will eventually be available solely through the online store. In short, Warhammer 40k and AOS are still their main games and their main settings. Now, the reason I mention this is not to bash on the Old World or to dishearten anybody, it's simply to explain how GW saw this game when it was announced and why they built it out the way they did, set in a unique timeline disconnected from the largely established lore and with only 9 official factions. They thought it was going to be a very niche game, and so they set it in its own gaming and narrative sphere. So looking at things today, you can see how the overwhelming popularity has completely caught them off guard. Suddenly they've got a massive community, a huge revenue stream and a fan base who want more, and that's what has ultimately led to the comments we'll mention in a moment. That all said, it's worth stressing that we have a long way to go still. While the scope of the game has now changed, the design team have said they are still committed to rolling out their initial plan before anything else, and that means all 9 factions with their arcane journals and a range of new and classic models, many of which need to be redesigned from scratch using older molds and casts. Frankly, it's going to be years before we see what this larger scope actually means for the game, but at the end of the day, it's an expectation we didn't have before, and that changes a lot. But what did the team actually say? Well, towards the very end of the interview, which by the way was focused on the arcane journal for the Orc and Goblin tribes, team member Danny says, "The game has been incredibly well received and it's great that there's so much passion. The scope of the project has grown, so please bear with us." And then his colleague JTY says, "We aim to do this forever. We have planned books for the next redacted years. We have all these miniatures planned and clear ideas of what we're working towards, but we have to get there. We're reintroducing the world and the setting over the course of 9 arcane journals. Once that's done, who knows?" Now, in the first instance, I don't think we should read too much into the redacted part. This game was always set to last year's, not least because that's how long it will take for all 9 factions to come out, let alone any campaign or narrative content. I think it's just a way of giving themselves a bit of room on the runway because, after all, plans always change. But thinking about their comments on what comes after the arcane journals, I think they do have something in mind. A lot of fans will be crossing their fingers and hoping that some of those legacy factions will get support, and that could well happen. We know Chaos Demons are set to move into the old world officially when the narrative allows for demonic incursions to manifest across the map, but otherwise the Vampire Counts, Dark Elves and Chaos Dwarves could well join them and have their older models brought back in light of the old world's popularity. I'll come to why I've picked those three out in a moment, but Dark Elves could easily be incorporated into any conflict that the High Elves are in, or with their Black Arcs could well appear on any shore across the old world. More so, the Vampire Counts, hidden away in Sylvania, are literally on the border of the old world map, making them figuratively and literally well placed for any expansion. And Chaos Dwarves could be a good narrative counterpoint for the Dwarven Mountain holds, especially given the growing influence of Chaos in the current timeline. Any and all of these could be a consideration for the design team. They may well be thinking about how to quell some of the disappointment from fans and expand the scale of the game by simply promoting some factions from Legacy to Core. Given how great some of those Dark Elf and Vampire Counts models are, I think that's a great option, and it could bring fresh army types and tactics to the game, which is only going to make the match play and tournament scene more interesting. But Chaos Dwarves are rumoured to be getting a release of their own in Age of Sigmar, and that brings us to the reason that I haven't called out the other Legacy factions. Again, Games Workshop partly didn't want to make the old world because, in their eyes, they already have a high fantasy tabletop game with tons of really cool armies, Age of Sigmar. Clearly they've seen the love for the old world, but they certainly don't want to create a situation where the two games unduly overlap and compete with one another. If you look at the list of core factions, none of those really appear in Age of Sigmar anymore, with maybe the exception of Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen. Of course, you can't have the old world without Chaos, and Beastmen themselves are rumoured to be getting dropped from AOS altogether in 4th edition and shifted to old world only. If true, that again shows you how distinct GW wants the old world to be, and so it's very unlikely we'll see a shift in support for Lizardmen, Ogre Kingdoms, Chaos Dwarfs if the rumours are true, or Skaven despite their impending range refresh. That might be disappointing at first, but at the same time it brings to light something else, which is that we might actually see the launch of armies for Cathay and Kislev. These two were very visible in the design updates we saw in the years following the game's announcement. We saw concept art, comments from the designers on new units they were thinking about, and up until a year before the game came out, announcements from staff that both factions were still on track. However, a month after the game's release, GW quietly announced in a Total War Warhammer 3 article that there weren't any current plans to bring Kislev or Grand Cathay to the tabletop for the foreseeable future. Now that the game has been out for a few months though, and is continuously sold out, things have changed, and I sense that if the design team are looking for ways to expand their new current vision for the old world, they may well look back at all of the conceptual and design work they've already done, and consider that there are many people who love playing those factions in Total War Warhammer 3, some of whom may well want to jump into tabletop gaming for the first time because of them. But that said, the main point is that those two factions are also very distinct from anything in Age of Sigmar, and that makes them perfect choices for what to work on next. After all, the game was initially planned with them in mind, so I guess it's simply going back to that original scope in 2019. One factor that can't be overlooked though is that any new plans for the game will naturally change over time, just as they did between 2019 and 2024. That's not just down to things going on in the world necessarily, but how Warhammer itself changes over time too. For example, by the time we've got all 9 core factions, we'll probably be looking toward, or perhaps even in, Warhammer 40k's 11th edition, and Age of Sigmar's 4th edition will be heavily invested in its new modular format that GW are experimenting with. In other words, Warhammer is constantly changing, but across all games we've seen a real focus on smaller skirmish formats, which comes back to that idea of accessibility. The designers themselves talked about the scope of the project increasing. That could well mean the core game itself, but it could also mean the setting of the old world more broadly, meaning we see kill team style games or narrative spin-offs like Cursed City. Personally, I'd be interested to see a refresh of Mordheim, which in the timeline of the old world has already been the city of the damned for a few hundred years, so it's there to be explored. That could bring back another bout of nostalgia for older fantasy fans, while also opening up that warband style of play that GW uses to encourage new and existing players to try out new settings and models. Your guess is as good as mine at the end of the day, but I think there's definitely a move to more skirmish format games in Warhammer right now, across every setting, and bringing that to the old world could address a deep insecurity GW has always had about fantasy being too niche and too complex for the more casual gamer. And with that option for accessibility could come more confidence in investing in the old world as a project. We'll see what the future holds, but given how successful and lucrative the old world is proving to be, I think even the team's wildest dreams may just be the beginning of something far bigger. So those are just a few of my thoughts on the recent comments from the Warhammer The Old World design team, and a few ideas for what that could mean in the years to come. Again, we've got a long way to go yet, but I think the fact that something has budged gives us all hope for the potential in this setting. But what do you think? What does this new scope for the project entail, and what would you like to see? And would you be interested in a skirmish style game set in the Old World? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. But as always, a big thank you for joining me today. If you liked the video, please do click the button and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to join me for future Warhammer videos, and I hope to see you around for my next one. But until then, take care.